With the release of the Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 campaign, I thought this would be a great time to go back and rank every Call of Duty campaign from the worst to the best. I will only be ranking the Call of Duty campaigns starting with COD 4 all the way up to the newest Modern Warfare 2. Not that I didn't like the CODs before COD 4, because I do think those campaigns were really great for their time, but they're just really hard to compare to the rest because of how outdated they are. And I will be ranking these campaigns on everything there is to talk about within the campaign. So that means story, gameplay, the soundtrack, the different features the campaign has, literally everything revolving around the campaign mode we will be talking about. In the last place, I have Black Ops 3. Now, I love Black Ops 3 as a whole because of the incredible multiplayer and the incredible zombies experience, but the campaign side of this game is not very good. I don't think it's terrible, of course, I think it's the worst of all of them, but I don't think it's god-awful. It just has a lot of issues, and to be honest, I don't think the issues are mainly surrounding the story, because I actually think the story can be kind of brilliant in some ways. It's just really confusing and hard for the average person to understand, and if you don't watch a bunch of videos explaining it to you, chances are you're not going to understand it, and that's completely fair because it is a very confusing story, but I think the story that is there is actually pretty brilliant. Again, you just have to really do your research to learn it. And I don't think it's a great way to execute your story for a campaign because it's not going to be very accessible for the average person. And even if the story wasn't confusing, there's still a lot of issues here, like the characters kind of suck. None of the characters are that interesting. Your main character isn't even a person, really. You get to choose from a bunch of random skins, and it doesn't even give your person a personality. You literally are just this nameless figure that just has some skin. When the characters lack personality, it makes it hard to really engage with the story because you can't engage with the characters. And even looking at a gameplay's perspective, this game is not really that enjoyable. The mission design is kind of poor, the set design is not the best, the AI don't work very properly. There are some cool features and gadgets you can play around with in the game that don't even exist in the multiplayer, and they can be kind of fun to explore, but that's really all this campaign does. Most of it kind of sucks, and I think the voice acting is pretty bad. I think the visuals aren't nearly as good as they are in multiplayer and zombies, which is kind of strange. So I don't know, this campaign all around is just a miss, in my opinion. It's not terrible, it's not awful, it's definitely the worst campaign in Call of Duty history. In the number 14th spot, I have Call of Duty Ghosts, which might be an unpopular opinion because I do know a lot of people love this campaign, and I really do enjoy a lot of the missions in this campaign. I think it's a very fun campaign. They have a lot of enjoyable missions that have a lot of crazy things going on, like you have missions with tsunamis, you got buildings falling down, you got earthquakes, a bunch of stuff happening within this campaign that I do think makes it an enjoyable experience to play. But the story kinda sucks. I mean, I would compare this to like a really fun, action-y blockbuster movie that ends up having a really bad story. That's kind of what this is acquainted to, and story is really important to me, and I just don't think Ghost has a good story. It's very poorly written all around, especially the villain of Rourke. I think he's a very bad villain, and a lot of the other characters are just not written to be very interesting. I mean, Logan, as the main character, has zero personality, which is unfortunate. Hesh is the main guy you're always with, your brother. He's also very boring, I'll be honest, and everyone else, just none of them really have a distinct personality that make them that interesting. None of these characters are even close to some of the best COD characters of all time. So that's, I think, the biggest issue with this campaign is just the story's not very interesting and it's poorly written in a lot of different aspects. The dialogue also is like really incredibly inorganic and all sounds contrived, and I really do think makes the experience not nearly as good as it should be. So although I really have a fun time on this campaign, I just don't find the story to be very good. In the number 13th spot, I have Vanguard, which I was very surprised to say because I really enjoyed the marketing for this game. I thought the trailers looked phenomenal. I was saying to myself, no matter how poor the multiplayer might be, I'm sure we're going to have a great campaign experience. And unfortunately, we just didn't have that. I think the best thing about Vanguard is that it does cover a lot of different parts of the war, which was a big criticism of COD World War II, is that it didn't cover enough of the war. This one did. There was missions in the Pacific theater, the European theater, and all sorts of countries around the world during World War II. So I think it was great in that aspect. And a lot of the missions were kind of fun. You had really great visuals. The graphics were phenomenal. And I will say the characters I enjoyed to a degree. But the story kind of kind of was lackluster, mainly in terms of the story structure. So the way they tell the story is the first mission's in present day, and then we have a bunch of flashbacks for our 4 main characters, kind of showing off where they've been before this event that we're playing in the first mission, what they've been up to during World War II, what their position was in World War II, and then it all reaches the final mission, which is back in present day, which takes place right after the first mission. So basically you only have 2 missions in the entire game that take place in present day, and all the other ones are flashbacks. I think it's a really weird way to structure your game. I don't mind having the game mainly be like World War II soldier backstories. I think it's an interesting concept, but it doesn't really work out very well because none of the characters' stories kind of fit together all that well. I really enjoy the gameplay aspect of all of them being together because they all have different abilities, and I especially love that final mission where it utilizes all the character traits in a different way. I thought that was cool. But like I said, the rest of the game, it's just weird how the story structure works. It never felt very engaging because of this, so I do think it was a big mistake for them to do this. Maybe there should have been like 1 flashback mission per character, and the rest of the game should have just been present day. But unfortunately, they spent way too much time on flashbacks and just ended up making the story feel so kind of just messy and all over the place. In the number 12 spot, I have Advanced Warfare, which I think has a lot of cool things about it. Again, just like Ghosts, a lot of the missions are pretty cool. You have a lot of unique gadgets you get to use in this campaign, like a ton of unique gadgets, more than any other campaign, and they're really fun to mess with. Some of them are available in multiplayer, some of them aren't actually, so you do get to just use them here. Like, of course, the grappling hook. They actually made a grappling hook multiplayer mode later into the life cycle of the game, but it wasn't normally there, and that was fun to use in campaign when we were able to use it, so a lot of cool stuff there. I do enjoy most of the characters. I think Jonathan Irons is a decent villain. He's not like incredible or anything, but he was an enjoyable villain, and obviously Mitchell was the main character you were playing as, and there's a couple of characters that I enjoyed, and the cutscenes were amazing in this game. This is when cutscenes first started looking really damn good in Call of Duty. Before this, they didn't really have like good looking cutscenes, but wow, it was amazing how this looked, and even to this day it still looks pretty great, so it's really a big accomplishment for Call of Duty. But the issue with this campaign, just like Ghosts, I wasn't a big fan of the story. I do think it was quite a generic story. It didn't really go for anything that new, and I think some of the aspects of it are interesting, like the whole idea of military kind of using all these new technology and how that affects war, and how war is now advanced, which is obviously in the title. I do like all the different things they go about with that story, but some of it does feel very generic, and a lot of the stuff is just very predictable, like the big plot twist with Jonathan Irons being the villain. I think it was obviously very predictable, and they end up going in kind of a generic route with it rather than being very different and distinct to make it set itself apart from other COD campaigns and even other fictional stories in general. So I don't think the campaign did anything that interesting, but I definitely think it's at least a decent campaign, so it's definitely not going to be that low on the list, because now we're starting to get to the campaigns that I genuinely do enjoy. In the number 11 spot, I have COD World War II. So COD World War II, I think the biggest issue with this is that it didn't expand much of the war itself. They should have focused on more aspects of the war, and it was definitely not as horrific as it could have been, because obviously war is horrific, and World War II especially is very horrific war, and I don't think it really covered the horrors that World War II can have as much as it should have. And I think if they did, I think it could definitely been a much better campaign. But for what they did give us, I really love the story here between these soldiers. I think this is some of the strongest camaraderie between any characters in the COD history. Like, even compared to, you know, Modern Warfare and Black Ops and all these other games, you really can see the camaraderie between the main cast. And I think it's just really awesome seeing them get through this campaign together. And that's really all I have to say about COD World War II. Like, I don't think this is a campaign that does that many great things, but it also doesn't do that many bad things. It's just one of those campaigns that I think is pretty good, but it's not amazing because, like I said, it doesn't do anything that fantastic. I just really love the characters here, and I really do think it's a strong story. I just think they could have done way more with it. It's just they didn't really go as in depth as they could have, and it does sometimes feel somewhat generic in some ways, but it's not a terrible thing. I think it still is a good story. In the number 10 spot, I have Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare, also known as Modern Warfare Remastered, which is the version I kind of prefer because obviously the graphics are way better, so obviously I'm going to prefer to play that newer version. I really do enjoy this campaign, but the problem with it, the only thing holding it back from being way better, is I do feel like this is before COD campaign started to really go in depth with its story, and at this point I do think the story was very simplistic. There wasn't really much to it. The characters had barely any depth. I mean, the most depth you would get is a couple pieces of dialogue that tell you about them, but you really don't get to learn about the characters of Price and Soap and all the other characters in this campaign. You really don't get to learn about them till later, so I do feel like their characters are not that interesting, and when the characters are not that interesting, it is definitely harder to get involved in the story. But I still think it is an incredibly innovative campaign. This is the first campaign that really felt like it had a story to it, even if the story wasn't that deep. Obviously, the COD campaigns before this were more focused on just being a kind of a war simulation, in air quotes. It's not really like a simulation, but more of like just putting you in the action just to see what's going on during World War II, because all the campaigns before this were set during World War II. This was the first one to have a modern story, and it was kind of actually like a story. You know, it actually had a lot more to it compared to your average COD campaign. So I think it was definitely innovative in that way, but at the end of the day, it didn't have much depth, and I definitely do think they got way better as the franchise went along for most of the games. In the number 8 spot, I have COD World at War. Now, this is kind of similar to COD 4, where I think the biggest issue with this campaign is the story with the characters. There's not much depth there, obviously, but it still is a really great campaign. It has a lot of solid things about it. It's very dark and gritty. It really does show the horrors of World War II more than any campaign does for a World War II shooter. I do think Rezanoff is one of the only characters in this campaign that actually is really interesting. Although we don't really learn much about him, his personality definitely feels very bold because Gary Oldman just gives an incredible vocal performance for this character. So every mission where you have Rezanoff in it is just so much fun. And the soundtrack in this game is incredible. I mean, it really adds to the cinematic feel that this game has. In the number 8 spots, I've got Black Ops Cold War. So Cold War has probably my favorite, or at least one of my favorite soundtracks in COD history. So definitely a big plus for this campaign. I think there's a lot of interesting things about the campaign as well. A lot of interesting, like, trippy story, kind of like what Black Ops 1 has, the original Black Ops 1. It does a lot more with that. Look at the whole mind control and CIA part of the Cold War. You have choices in this campaign as well. The only other COD to do this was Black Ops 2, and I really do like it because it does lead to some different outcomes, some different endings. It's interesting. I don't think it's like the best thing that you need for a campaign, but it definitely does add to replayability because it makes you want to go back and play with different choices and see how different the story is by doing different things. So I do think that adds a lot to the campaign. Some of the characters are pretty great, like Adler. Adler is awesome in this campaign. He's definitely one of the best campaign characters of all time. But my biggest issue with this campaign was that it really doesn't feel like it was meant to be what it is. I do know this is true based on leaks that originally Black Ops Cold War was supposed to be a full Black Ops 1 reboot, just like Modern Warfare 2019 is a reboot of COD 4. But then it ended up getting changed and turned into a direct sequel to Black Ops 1. So a lot of it just doesn't feel right. I feel like they probably cut a lot out, which is why Woods and Mason feel like inexistent characters in this campaign. And when they are in it, they don't really get to do much, and their story isn't that important. The story is mainly about Adler and Bell. Those are like the two most important characters to this campaign, and everyone else just kind of feels like they're just there for the ride. And I don't think they did enough with Mason and Woods. I kind of wish we saw more of them because they are the most important Black Ops characters, of course. So that's a bit unfortunate. And I think the ending was quite anticlimactic, and I mean for both endings, whether or not you got the good or the bad ending. Both of them were very anticlimactic. I didn't enjoy either of them. I don't think they were good for the story. And one of them was just a random crazy gimmick that just was kind of cool the first time you did it, but then you were like, that's really stupid story-wise. So wasn't a big fan of that there. But one last thing I could say about this campaign is that I do love the locations that our characters visit. I think the locations and atmosphere is incredibly important. And Black Ops Cold War is really damn awesome in that aspect. There's so many cool places. I mean, the 80s obviously allows for some really bright and visually pleasing locations, and they go to all of them. In the number 7th spot is going to be Modern Warfare 2019. So the biggest positive about this campaign was how incredibly realistic and immersive it felt, especially the first time you played it. I mean, it was really different for the Call of Duty franchise. And I usually don't care about that kind of stuff in like multiplayer and such because I don't think it affects multiplayer in any way. but I think it does add a lot to the campaign experience. My biggest issue with this campaign was the lack of different locations. All the locations they go to were kind of boring, other than, of course, Piccadilly. Piccadilly was awesome to see, but they were only really in like Russia and the Middle East for most of the campaign, and I just think after a while those locations kind of get old, and I really would like to have visited more countries. I mean, you look back at Cold War, they went to so many different places in that campaign, and of course the story didn't really ask for them to visit any more places than what they did, but that's just an issue I had. I mean, same issue I had with COD 4. I like when they go to a lot of variety of places, and they really didn't in Modern Warfare 2019. But overall, I think this game has a pretty good story. I do like how not all of the characters are just rebooted versions of the original Modern Warfare cast. They do have a lot of new characters, and they are really great, like Alex and Farah. And of course, you have Price and Gaz, who are rebooted characters, but they are very different than the other versions. So overall, pretty good campaign. In number 6 spot is actually going to be the newest Call of Duty, Modern Warfare 2. Now, I really enjoyed this campaign. I think there's a lot of amazing things about it, but I also do think there's a couple things I don't like. First of all, the soundtrack is quite lackluster compared to other Call of Duty soundtracks. A lot of the enemies can be kind of frustrating in this game, mainly the, of course, ones with the armor. I think they have way too many of those armor-plated enemies in this game, and some of them are just really ridiculous. And yeah, it adds a level of difficulty to it, but it's just annoying difficulty. It's not like it's fun challenge. It's just annoying, so I'm not a fan of that. And I do think the story as a whole, although it's really good, it is very predictable, and there is a lack of deaths. And I know every COD campaign has characters dying left, right, and center, but I felt like after the first Modern Warfare, it would make sense for this one to continue in a way that would kind of up the stakes a bit, and I don't feel like the stakes were that present in this campaign. And something I didn't think about while playing it, but I started to realize later on after people started talking about it, this game basically forgets like Modern Warfare 2019 even exists. Like, the story does not really continue seamlessly from MW 2019 to this game. It doesn't really talk about much of what happened in that game. Farah is basically forgotten about, which is one of the biggest characters in Modern Warfare 2019, and she's barely in this sequel. They add a bunch of new characters, and most of which didn't even appear in the original Modern Warfare 2019 from 3 years ago. So I don't know, it was just weird how they did that. They just kind of go with this whole new story, and of course a lot of it is similar to the original Modern Warfare trilogy, so a lot of it was predictable, like of course the whole Shepard's betrayal stuff. It was all kind of predictable. I do like a lot about it though. So first of all, the locations are really awesome, a lot of great visuals, vibrant colors. Graphics are by far the best they've ever been here, which should be the case because it's the newest COD. Characters all have good depth, and the dialogue is fantastic. I love the characters in this game, especially Soap, Ghost, Alejandro. Even some of the villains were really good. There's a lot of good characters to this game. I do think a lot of the missions are really enjoyable. There's a good mission length to it too. Some of the missions are really short, some of them are much longer. I never felt like they dragged out too long, except for maybe 1 or 2 missions, but for the most part, they were pretty good. And the realism is definitely the highest it's ever been. And again, I do like realism in the campaign, although I do not like it in multiplayer, but it's great in campaign. I think it adds a lot. So this campaign, really great. I was definitely satisfied with it, and I can't wait to see that Modern Warfare 3 in a few years. Now in the top 5, in the number 5 spot, we have Black Ops 1. I think a lot of people might have this higher than me normally, but the only issue I really have with it is it's lacking a great villain. And there's a couple of aspects to the story that are a little wonky, but most of it is fantastic. Most of it is absolutely phenomenal. I love the Cold War era to this game. Obviously, we had that in Black Ops Cold War as well, but this was a different side of the Cold War. It was a little bit earlier in the Cold War. You have some missions, focusing on the Vietnam War. You have some missions focusing specifically on the CIA side of things within the Cold War, and it's all incredibly interesting. Some great characters here. We got Woods, we got Mason, we got a little bit of Reznov, but not too much, just enough for me to kind of still be happy with his appearance again, but it's definitely not as much as we saw back in World at War. This is definitely one of the more unique Call of Duty campaigns as well, especially for its time. It was just so different than anything else we've ever had, and I really do love that side of it. It's got a lot of like creepy, eerie vibes to the campaign as well because of the whole CIA brainwashing story going on with Mason. I really, really love how this campaign story unfolds, and I think it follows up perfectly in Black Ops 2. In number 4 spot, I've got Modern Warfare 3. I love how this game just goes World War 3 in full force. Like, there's just this massive war going on, and you have some insane battles that are incredibly large scale. And a lot of people give this game a lot of criticism. I never understood it. I really love how these past 2 games went in this direction, with the war being way greater than things we actually experience in reality, because obviously we're not having, you know, a full war going on in New York City in real life. But that's the good thing about the fiction of this. You know, you get to see this stuff go down, and it makes it way more interesting. And that's one of the reasons I do prefer this Modern Warfare trilogy over the newer one, which obviously we haven't completed yet. But from the 2 new Modern Warfares, they're much more, again, realistic, and I like the realism in terms of like how the guns work and the AI. But in terms of the story, I would like to see them go a little bit bigger, and even if that means over the top, I'm okay with that. And I don't think any of this stuff in this game is that over the top. Like, most of it is stuff that could theoretically happen, it just wouldn't based on our current climate. And I do think it really raises the stakes for the campaign as well, especially because there's a lot of character deaths in this campaign. You get to experience a lot of the characters you play as get killed, or a lot of the characters you play alongside get killed, and I really love how that unfolds. Obviously, you have Soap's death here, which is definitely one of the most impactful moments in Call of Duty history. So many different locations you get to experience as well. You go to New York City, you go to London, you go to Paris, Germany, South America, so many different places because of the campaign being all about a world war, and so therefore you are traveling all around the place. And Makarov, great villain as well. He was a fantastic character, especially because he appeared in the prior campaigns, and then he really becomes the big bad in Modern Warfare 3. I think it works out perfectly. Love that final mission. I think it's easily one of the best missions in COD history. So yeah, incredible campaign. In the number 3 spots, Modern Warfare 2. So originally I actually had Modern Warfare 2 way higher on my original ranking, which I did about 3 years ago, but it went down a little bit because 2 other Call of Duties went a little bit higher as I've replayed them. Modern Warfare 2 is incredible. Incredible. It is emotional. You have, you know, the death of Roach and Ghost, which were characters we didn't really know that well, but the way they did it was just really, really great. One of the best campaign soundtracks. The music in this game is just phenomenal. There's a lot more to this campaign compared to the last couple campaigns that came before it. It really just expanded what you could do for a Call of Duty game, and again was starting to focus on a world war as opposed to just being, you know, your typical military conflicts like what you saw in COD 4. It started to become this really big world war, and it also showed a lot of complexity of war as well, like for example having one of the main villains be on the US side rather than the main villain just being some, you know, terrorist in the Middle East or something. It was something a little more complex than that, and it showed the complexity of war, and I really love that betrayal and how it worked in the campaign. It's definitely one of the most shocking moments in gaming history. The only thing holding this back for me, the only thing that makes it go below the next 2, is that I still do feel like this is still a point where COD campaigns didn't really go in depth with the characters, and although we liked the characters, we had fun with them because their voice acting was really good, we didn't really know much about them. We didn't know too much about Price at this point. We kind of learned a lot more in Modern Warfare 3, but at this point, I feel like we didn't know these characters as well as we do later on, and although I really love them as characters, I don't feel the same emotion for them as I would for a character that we really do learn a lot about throughout the game. So although amazing campaign, it's just a little bit lower than I used to have it just because the characters aren't as strong as some other campaigns. Number 2 is going to be Call of Duty Black Ops 2. So this one got put above Modern Warfare 2 solely because of one character. That is Menendez. Menendez is the greatest villain, not only in COD history, but I would say in one of the greatest in fiction in general, in my opinion at least. I know no one else will probably agree with me on that, but I love this villain. I think he's incredibly complex, and he has a ton of personality to him. He's crazy. He knows how to get shit done. He reminds me a lot of the Joker, especially Dark Knight's Joker. He just feels very similar to him in terms of his ideologies and what he's trying to do and how he's able to raise up a group. He definitely reminds me of Joker, and I really do love the story of this character here. I love how this game also takes place in the past as well as in the future, so you get to experience both parts. You get to experience almost like a sequel to Black Ops 1 where you get to play as Mason and you're with Woods and Hudson and all them, and it's like right after or a couple years after the Black Ops 1 story. And then you also get to experience in the future with Mason's son David, you get to experience the kind of futuristic side of war, the first time we get to experience the futuristic warfare in Call of Duty, and that storyline is also really solid, and they all kind of connect as well. I love how it all connects back to Menendez and his big plan, and some of the best story and character moments in the franchise here. You have a lot of great moments, especially the moment where you get to see David learn about how Woods was, he did shoot and kill Alex Mason, David's father. So of course it depends on your choices. You could have shot him in the leg and then he would come back later in the story, which is still really crazy and surprising, but in the moment he does think that he was the reason for him getting killed, because of course he was tricked by the characters there. And I mean, that scene alone, I think that's one of the best missions in COD history, when you get that reveal and then Menendez takes in everyone into like that little warehouse, and he shoots Hudson he shoots Woods in the kneecaps and then slits Hudson's throat. And I think it's just such an incredible mission, man. I think it's definitely one of the best missions in COD history because of all of the character reveals and the emotion behind it. And then you get just a great campaign for the rest of it as well, a great soundtrack and a great finale. And again, with all the different choices and such, you get all these different outcomes, and it just makes it so replayable. Absolutely love this campaign. It's not the best though. In the number 1 spot, I'm going to have Infinite Warfare. The only thing I don't love about this game, I do feel like the villain was a little underwhelming, but that's it. He was not a bad villain by any means. He was just a little underwhelming compared to what I would like from a villain. But at the end of the day, the reason why this doesn't affect the campaign as much as it might affect another campaign is because everything that is so good about this game is so good. Like, it is so strong. And it's not really about the villain either. It's not like he's a main focus. It is really about Nick Reyes and the journey of this leader. And it's so different than your typical Call of Duty campaign, because normally you play as the rookie who's like new to the squad, like, you know, Soap in Modern Warfare. You get to play as him, and he's like a new character, and he comes in and he has to learn all the new tricks and stuff. You don't get to play as the leader usually, but in this game you play as the leader. He is leading this group and trying to win this battle, and it is just really awesome getting to see his character's journey, and especially towards the end of the campaign where he realizes he can't save everyone. He's all about trying to save everyone. It reminds me a lot of Woody from Toy Story. Like, he's the type of person who's just never gonna leave someone behind. He's not about that, and he has to realize later in the campaign that sometimes people have to be left behind. That's kind of part of war, and then he ends up doing the sacrifice to leave himself behind and get killed in order for the mission to be accomplished, and it ends up getting most of his squad killed as well, but they successfully complete the mission, and leaving Salter being one of the only characters alive by the end of the campaign, I think is such a deep and real thing. Like, it's not all happy like, you know, some of the other campaigns might be, where a lot of people end up being alive by the end. This one kills off a lot of characters. It is sad, it is emotional, but it feels right for a game that's all about war. And I love how it takes you on the journey all the way through. You don't get many like skips in time. If you want to go to the next mission, you literally have to fly to the next planet, and you get to see pretty much all of it. The game looks amazing as well. The visuals are beautiful for its time, especially the cutscenes are phenomenal. Definitely one of the best looking campaigns. I love the locations you get to visit. I mean, we get to go to different planets. I mean, come on, that's insanely different than any other COD out there. And again, the characters are phenomenal. Some of the most developed characters in COD history. Nick Reyes being, I think, one of my favorite characters. You have Salter is great as well. Nora Salter, she's incredible. She's an incredible sidekick. And then Ethan is one of the funniest and just most charming characters in COD history as well, and he's a damn robot. He's not even human, but he has more personality than half of the other characters we've ever seen in COD history. I just absolutely love this campaign. I love the story it was telling, and it's a shame that a lot of people didn't even get to try it just because they jumped on the hate bandwagon this game had before it even launched. And that is going to do it for my campaign ranking for Call of Duty. Let me know your list in the comment section below. I thought this was a great time to do this ranking because we're probably not going to have another campaign for quite some time. There's been rumors that we will be getting a Modern Warfare 2 campaign DLC, which would be kind of interesting, but I'm not too sure how that's going to work out. Give me your top 15, or you can do top 18. You could include COD 1, COD 2, COD 3. You can include whatever Call of Duties you want to include. Just let me know. But I don't think it's fair to include Black Ops 4 because I don't really count the Specialist HQ as an actual campaign. Although some people might count it, I wouldn't count it. It's not really a campaign. So hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. Let me know your thoughts. Peace out.